From UBN Studios, you're listening to UNSUGARCOATED with Aalia, bringing you interviews with public figures and inspirational people speaking on self-improvement with empowering themes. And I'm your host, Aalia Lanius. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of your favorite social good podcast. I'm so happy to be with you today and bring you another, a returning guest today. I am going to issue a trigger warning for this particular episode because we do discuss things such as molestation and sexual assault. So if anything like that would bother you, please, I will not be offended if you don't listen. But if you happen to know someone who's been through something like this and you feel that it would add value or benefit them, do share because it's not always easy to discuss these things. So for those of you who may remember, in episode 25, I had shared about AB218, which is a California law. It was enacted in 2020. It's a 3-year look back window for survivors of sexual trauma or assault when they were children to, for the first time, have the opportunity to pursue civil litigation against the perpetrators as well as organizations that covered this up. Boy Scouts of America, Catholic Church. Yes, these are some of the bigger stories that we are familiar with of organizations that covered up the abuse of children. However, it's not exclusive to them, and I am an example of that. So to kind of remind you guys a little bit of the story and my guest and why they're here, an important part of this, a couple weeks ago about 3 weeks ago, in the Santa Maria Times, there was an article that came out on the law, and it included part of my story, especially because of the events that have happened since episode 25, where I shared with my audience that I would be moving forward with my own case. And there have been some events that I'd like to share with you and how those impacted me. And I would like to do so with the hopes of inspiring somebody else, because what AB18 law does and how it's helped certain people and how it can potentially still help people, that opportunity ends at the end of this year to file. And it is a process, but one that I am glad I have taken. So to kind of peel back and go back to the beginning of it, I was 14 years old. Well, not the beginning, but just kind of briefly. When I was 14 years old, I was living with a family that was part of my church. I ended up going into the women's home. And when I had finally come forward and shared that my pastor's son-in-law had sexually assaulted me and molested me, they chose to not believe me, and they never reported it. And these things went unpunished. And for me, as a young girl who was already dealing with unexceptional circumstances, being abandoned by my family, looking, at my own life, not really knowing where to go, but looking at adults and thinking, if I speak up for the first time as a victim, because I'd been a victim before, they're going to know what to do. They're going to handle this. But they didn't. And that does happen. So, but fast forward in my life, right? This was 30 years ago. I survived that. I moved on from that. I learned to thrive in my life because I did not remain in a victim state. And I'm very grateful for that. And in the course of my life, I met an amazing person, Detective Moses Castillo. I'm not going to bring him on just quite yet, but he and I shared a relationship through kids. He was the coach of my son's soccer team. And so when this law came out, he came to me and said, Aalia, I think we can actually do something for you in this particular case. And my answer was, I'm okay. Thank you so much. I've closed the book on that. I've closed the chapter on that part of my life. But I'd love to bring you guys on the show and educate others, because this is what we're here to do. We're here to serve you. We're here to educate you and make you feel less alone, because you're not alone. So that was important to me. But in our conversations, he said something so poignant to me. He says, Aalia, I know what you would tell someone else. You would say that you deserve justice, and I'm going to say the same thing to you. And so there began my journey, and I agreed to file my own case against this particular organization. And it's been it's been an incredible journey. I know I'm getting caught up because I'll bring him on. I was a little unsure of how I want to lay out this conversation. I'm going to go ahead and bring him on to kind of share what happened and why those things mattered to the case. But more importantly, I want to give this part. What he did for me was took me on a journey I didn't think I needed. I didn't think I could be more empowered. I didn't think that I could find more healing. But through this, I have. And I'm actually not done yet. We're still going through the system. We're still going through the litigation process. But what I've gained in the meantime, it's something that I hope inspires others. So without further ado, let me go ahead and bring on our guest. For nearly 30 years, Detective Moses Castillo has been a fixture in the Los Angeles community, serving as a respected law enforcement official. During the early years of his esteemed tenure with the LAPD, Detective Castillo served among the specialized team of detectives at the Robbery Homicide Division. In 1999, he was promoted to the rank of detective at the Newton Sex Crimes Division. Over the next 20 years, Castillo devoted his life to helping survivors of sexual abuse, particularly children, obtain justice against their attackers. A highly regarded member of the LAPD's sexually exploited child unit, his contributions have helped close cases and secure justice for hundreds of sexual abuse survivors in Los Angeles. Following his retirement in 2019 from the LAPD, Mr. Castillo joined Dordulian Law Group as chief investigator, where he plays a pivotal role in the process of securing justice for our clients, applying decades of law enforcement experience and unique investigative expertise to important cases like mine. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Detective Moses Castillo.
Thank you, Aalia. Appreciate it. Thank you for having this conversation. That's so important because there's somebody out there that's listening that is still living in silence, and hopefully throughout this conversation they'll feel the encouragement to hopefully get that courage to reach out and get some help.
Right. Yes, because it's not easy. And even in my own case, I would still say, despite what happened to me, when you are young and something like that happens to you, there's not always someone around to say to that child, you're not at fault. This was not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. You're innocent, and the other person did something bad. When it comes to this case, and I want to ask you about your background and how you've served the community actually as detective, but in a case where you have an organization, because for me, part of this case is also the accountability when somebody does come to you with this type of information. What are they supposed to do?
Absolutely. So when somebody discloses, like in your case, to a pastor or to somebody from the church that, hey, this is going on, they're mandated reporters under the law. So they're supposed to notify the authorities so that the investigation can begin. It's not their duty to decide whether or not they believe it happened or not. It is their duty under the law to report it. Any suspected child abuse report, whether it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, they need to report it. That's the law. When they fail to do so, it's a crime. It's a misdemeanor. And so, thankfully, AB218 was enacted at the beginning of 2020. And now, as you well stated, it expires at the end of this year. It's a three-year look-back window that eliminates the statute of limitations. And we could go back as far as we want to, as long as we could corroborate it. And we did get some cooperation in your case, and we could talk about that, how we got that cooperation.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the most amazing parts of it as well. Here, I thought, this is 30 years ago. I was a child. I don't even actually talk to that many people from that period of my life, and I hadn't. I only knew one of the people, or really one or two of the people still from the church. And we were able to get other people that came out and said, yes, she spoke up and nothing was done, right? We spoke to the pastor who acknowledged as well. But more importantly, you tracked down the man who did this to me, and you got him on the phone. He got on the phone with me, and I'm sure you remember that I was very ornery, right? Like, I was like, I know you're calling to say I'm sorry, but I just want you to know I was innocent. Right. I was, maybe the woman I am today could say that to him, but I can't lie and say that it wasn't impactful when he said to me, you're right. And even for you. So this is true. When you came to me and said, Aalia, these, I had shared with you in confidence these things, but as a victim, we always struggle with the he said, she said, right?
Right.
Like, did it really happen? Maybe she's fibbing. Maybe there's something else more that you don't say, because that's often what, people will think a victim. So you got him to acknowledge, you didn't get him to, excuse me, that's not the right words. You gave him an opportunity
Right.
to admit the things he had done, and he did so. As a detective, for you, what is that moment like? I know for me it was very vindicating, but what was it like for you?
It was just an awesome to see how that interaction actually gave you a sense of validation, a sense of, okay, she is telling the truth. She's not lying. And I'll give him a little bit of credit. I mean, he manned up and took responsibility. He didn't try to dance around it. And that's why I said, look, I could call her right now. Would you mind putting her on the phone and you want to talk to her? Because she's looking for an apology. And to my surprise, he accepted it. He accepted that opportunity. And man, I jumped on it right away before he changed his mind. I called you on the phone. I'm grateful that I called you and give you a heads up that may happen, because I've been very successful in talking to people and getting people to talk about what they did, and it's still happening now, because see, many people live in silence, and when they commit these, and also these suspects, once they commit these acts on a child, it's a point of no return. They'll commit these acts over and over again, because especially if they never got caught. So maybe he didn't get another live victim. I don't know. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. But I guarantee you, he's probably into the images of sexual exploitation on children on the internet. That's a rampant issue on the internet. We don't use the word child pornography anymore, because it kind of desensitizes the issue of child pornography, because that's not what it is. It's exploitation of children in a sexual manner. So yeah, you're absolutely right. So he actually admitted, and he actually asked for an apology, and to witness that, it was very gratifying, because I know how much that meant to you.
Yeah, and to speak only slightly on that, and because I think that it's important. The victim harbors something, but also the perpetrator. To the men out there, or people rather, I'm not just going to put this on men exclusively, to the person out there who has committed a sexual crime against somebody else in any way, whether they justify it in their mind or not, is there some sense of relief when they're finally able to acknowledge and be honest with themselves?
Yeah, I've literally, I think I've spoken to thousands of suspects, and whenever they come clean and just lay it out there and tell us what happened, not just an admission. Admission is, yeah, I did it, I'm sorry. But when they give you the details, and that's the confession, yes, this is how it happened, this is how I did it, and this is what went on, and giving me, a play-by-play, if you will, that's a confession. And oftentimes they'll say, they know what's coming, they know the consequences, but there's something, they feel like the load is lifted. And sometimes, I'll ask them this very pointed question, especially when it involves children. Once they start talking, I'll say, hey, Johnny, how old were you when you first discovered you had a sexual preference for children? And you'd be surprised. They'll say, that's a very good question. Let me think about it. And then they start thinking, and they go, you know what? I was about age 14 when I started to discover I had this sexual preference for children. And then they began to talk about that. And that has been validated by the training I've received, because there's some studies out there that do indicate that these men, or sometimes women, because women also commit these crimes, that they realize that they have this sexual preference for children. Sometimes it's preteens, sometimes it's prepubescent, sometimes it's very young. I hate to say this, but the very youngest child I ever had as a victim was somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks of being born. That is like the worst of the worst. And the oldest victim I ever helped was 92 years old, and then everything in between. So there's a myth that only the beautiful get assaulted, only the attractive ones, so it's not about the looks, it's not about anything. It's about this evil perversion that's about power and control, and that's why they do these things. And then when they have this especially when they have this sexual preference for children, it's hard to contain it, because we used to believe that people that were into collecting these images or videos on the internet, that's all they did. And that child molesters, that's how they did, is molest children, but not anymore. They cross boundaries, and they do both.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's a very sad commentary.
I have the most interesting conversations with my husband in explaining that, and I'm going back to when I was a child. You know, I was molested, as I've shared, with between the ages of 4 and 7. I was molested by 5 different men. And one of the most amazing things about that, and you're not going to be surprised to hear this, but the majority of those molestations took place in front of other people, or while other people were around. But they're very coy, or, you know, very slick about it. And a child doesn't know or understand. I didn't know or understand what was necessarily happening, and how to even say this is wrong, and create the boundaries that I have now. When you deal with parents, and I'm going to say this because I find a lot of parents, so I grew up, you know, I'm telling you, I have these conversations with my husband. I'm like, I'm so on guard. You can't just assume the neighbor's a nice guy. And I don't want to make everyone the enemy, or
Right.
every person rather, again, because it goes both ways. But I find a lot of parents are very naive to the possibility that their children can end up being the victims of sexual crimes. How often do you come across those type of parents in the course of your career?
Well, you know what? I investigated sex crimes for over 20 years. 15 of these years were when victims were children. And I could count on one hand the amount of times that a mother of the child actually did the right thing and reported to the authorities. The majority, the other times, they actually sided with the perpetrator. They sided with the accused, and they really, you know, berailed the victim, and made her feel like she was at fault. She was guilty. She asked for it. She instigated it, and it's really, really sad, because now that's when you get the retractions. Okay, well, you know what? He was right. It's creating chaos for our family. I'm just going to take it back and say it didn't happen, and then that makes the case even more complicated to move forward. But it's still not impossible, because I had many cases where victims recanted, and I was still able to successfully prosecute him, but using other evidence, such as a confession.
Right.
He can't take back his confession. I mean, he could argue that it was a false confession or whatever, but the way I approached my interrogations and my confessions, they were solid, and there was no way I got a false confession out of it. But yeah, so those are real issues, and it's sad, because what's one thing I try to teach our community when I do this community meetings or trainings, if you will, I teach them, look, these offenses are occurring by people you know, people you love, people you trust. It could be a step parent, it could be a biological parent, it could be a living boyfriend or a living girlfriend, or it could be an uncle, grandfather, coach, anybody that you know and love and respect. And sometimes we teach our kids, you know, stranger danger, right?
Right.
But it's not. It's hey, you got to teach your kids that they have their bodies, they're special, and it's their bodies, and it's nobody else's. And if somebody does anything to them, it makes them feel uncomfortable or sad or confused, to make sure they reach out and tell someone. So yeah, so it's a sad commentary when a child is not believed, especially by a parent, where they're supposed to offer love and secure and support.
Right, absolutely. And to your point, even in my own case, I mean, it was the same thing. You know, the organization chose to take the road of, he's telling the truth, and we're just going to berate you until you say this is a lie. It's a lie, right? It's a lie, right? You'll just tell us you're lying, and we'll forgive everything. You know,
let's pray. We're going to pray it out of you.
Yes, and you know, and then, you know, I just look back, and I can imagine any other person in that type of situation, because you just feel like, well, I guess I'm going to have to just give in. But I think that time is still an interesting thing. And I think that that's where one of the most important parts of the discussion is. The sex crimes themselves and what happens are horrible, but there is survivorship, and time can heal you and then eventually bring about circumstances. I feel very fortunate in this case because, you know, I mean, even to your point, you said that. We had that same conversation with, you know, Pastor Helen. She says, well, yeah, she told me, but I didn't really believe her. Like, I just thought, right? You know, I mean, it was ironic, and it was an amazing opportunity for me to not be the 14-year-old girl intimidated by this person, to finally say, but I was telling the truth.
But let me tell you, I don't believe Pastor Helen when she says that. I believe she did believe you, but that was her way out of not reporting it because it involved somebody she knew, somebody she loved, somebody she cared for. It was her daughter's husband, for God's sake. And so she just didn't want to deal with it. So what's the excuse? Oh, let's just not believe her, and then we don't have to do anything about it.
Right.
So that's just trying to save face. But I'm glad she cooperated because, again, it corroborates everything you're telling us and everything we knew about this, what happening. So I just can't wait to see if we go to trial on this. I can't wait to see the reaction when they hear that this. I'm pretty sure by now they know that the individual has confessed and it did happen. So I wish I would have a fly on the wall when she heard that news.
I know. It just because I did go through a lot, and to the young girl out there who did and is, that's the thing that we're trying to say. Them not believing you doesn't change the true narrative of your story.
Right.
And I say, hold on to that, because in the end, it is your truth. And I think that as we become a more aware society and we do empower young people to speak up, that matters. Now, what I am concerned about, and I'm sure you are as well, depending on where you live, prosecutorial changes can actually lead to... So AB218 is great. It's fantastic. It gave us 3 years. But sadly, in the last couple years in Los Angeles, we had a new DA, Gascon, in Los Angeles specifically. And while I am not going to blame Gascon for everything that's gone wrong in Los Angeles, there are plenty of areas as a result of a pandemic, as a result of inflation, economic, all these issues, crime has risen everywhere. But my issues, and I supported Gascon initially because I do believe that, I myself, was young and made mistakes, and you can't throw the book at somebody for minor crimes. People deserve second chances. So I was in line with that thought. But there's a pendulum that swings. There's a spectrum. And if you have no rules, okay, so if you have too many rules and regulations, you have a society that's over, everything is restricted. But then if you loosen that to the point of nothing, then it's chaos, right? And you work still very heavily in a lot of areas with law enforcement as well in your investigative work. Share with me how the most recent changes have impacted young victims of sex crimes to seek justice.
Well, you know what? As it relates to George Gascon, I could tell you that he has really just switched the entire philosophy of the DA's office. It's more criminal-minded and more accused-minded than fighting for victims and getting true justice for victims. So with that said, you can learn more at recalldageorgegascon.com is the website to learn more about his policies and directives. But I will tell you this. I'll give you an example. When a victim, under California law, there's this thing called the California Constitution. And Article 1, Section 28 lists 17 rights that a victim of a crime is afforded under the California law, the Constitution, for God's sakes. And George Gascon is ignoring it, is not following it. So he's not adding special circumstances to many of the cases, special allegations. Like we were just talking before we got recording this, we were talking about the case from Mother's Day weekend of all days, where this mother killed her 3 young children. Now, if that case gets charged as per Gascon's directives, she's only going to face 3 murder charges and nothing of the special allegations or circumstances, like the lying in wait, all the acts that she did to premeditate this. Because as we're learning from this, we're learning this was not a one-day event. It was over several days. So that tells us that there was a pre-planning, laying in wait, and then there's a special allegation of multiple victims and on and on. But again, if he doesn't charge this individual as required under California law, she will be out in about 20 years, because under elder parole, anybody that's convicted of a life sentence can do 20 years of it and reach age 50, and they'll be eligible for parole. And where's the justice when 3 innocent children had nothing to do with the fact that they're being murdered. My only solace is that these beautiful children are now in heaven, but man, getting there was the most horrible death anyone can experience.
And people should pay for what they do. Ultimately, I do believe that, and I believe that without consequences, again, to the chaos. And you had another case. I mean, you're often on TV, on Telemundo. I know you collaborate a lot with the news to keep the community educated and abreast of these type of issues. There was another, I believe, a sexual assault of a child that was going unpunished as well. You dedicated your life to empowering victims. Is that what gets you out there in front of the cameras and banging the drum to say this is not right?
Yes, I created a special message myself to victims that I hope to help in the future. And you could see that video at my landing page. It's detectivemoses.com. And in that message, I stated something along these words. I give myself permission to feel your pain. And that is the motivation, the inspiration to give it everything I got to make sure we do everything to secure justice for you. Now, I could only do it in a civil form of justice, but I told my boss that when I accepted his offer, hey, don't be surprised if any of our civil cases end up criminal cases, because there are still some statutes that, can still be attached on the criminal side. Depending, it's very complicated, but us knowing the law and knowing the cases, we'll know which ones are still within statute and which ones we could pursue. And if we could pursue criminal allegations against someone, we'll do it, because that's where we get true justice. The civil justice is just the icing on the cake once we get it. But yeah, so know that the pain is what inspires me. And I'll tell you a real quick story. I met this girl when she was about 14 years old for the very first time, because her biological father, would rape her. He would check her out of school on the excuse that I'm taking her to the doctor, take her home, rape her, bring her back to school. That happened several times. The girl even told the school official, and they did nothing. So it happened again. So I get him to confess. He goes to prison. That case actually resolved itself pretty quickly. Normally, I keep a victim for years before the case is settled, but I'll give him credit. He didn't want his daughter to suffer anymore. He pled guilty, and he went to prison for a long, long time. And I never heard from this child until she was 24, so 10 years go by. And it was actually my first day back to work after taking a medical leave. And I came in later than usual, and I'm walking into the police headquarters, and I see this lady talking to the front desk officer there, and I see that she's crying. And I hear the officer say, "Who do you want to talk to?" And then she turns and sees me, and she points and says, "Him." And I turn back and say, "You're talking about me?" Because I didn't recognize her. She had some sunglasses, and again, it's been 10 years, right? And she sees me. She begins to cry. She takes off her sunglasses and says, "You don't remember me?" I says, "Yeah." Then when I saw her, I said, "Your mom is Carmen," and that just started crying even more. Of course, I remember you. Then I said her name, because it finally came to me. Her mom's name came first, and then her name came. Then I ushered her to my office, and the very first thing she says to me, Aalia, she says, "Does the pain ever go away?" And that's the $1 million question. And I told her, no, because you could never unsee or remove that image or that experience from your mind and your heart, because you lived it.
Right.
And I use this analogy of this scar. I have this scar. I remember how I got this cut right here. I know the details, but I healed, and I was able to recover from it. And you could get to a place where you healed, and she's crying, I'm crying, and then I finally started to assess her for 5150 hold, because I really felt that maybe there was more to it. And sure enough, she actually wanted to end her life. I got her some professional help. They took her to the hospital. 3 days later, she calls me and says, "Thank you. I needed that. And I knew you were the only one that would do what you did." So that's a reminder. You just don't know the impact you can have on someone's life, because the reason why she came back to me, she said, is you never judged me. You never saw me less or discounted me, and you believed me, and that's why I came back. And I'm glad now. And now fast forward a year from that time, She was doing really well. She's thriving, excelling, and so that's why I do what I do.
Right. I love that. And I can appreciate that, they would come back and say, and come to you, I mean, look, some of the statistics that we know are true. Every 68 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. Every 9 minutes, that victim is a child. There's this, belief that I heard a clip recently, and I'm going to give Dave Chappelle credit for this, but it's very true. There's people that are kind of trying to think on these terms of better or worse, as if to eradicate the notion of good and bad. And I agree that there's a moral compass we each have. My north, my south are different than maybe another person's moral compass. But there are people who operate on bad actions. They are bad actors, and they do very bad things. And those things hurt people, that then they have to live with the fallout. I love that you said, no, the pain never ends, but we learn to reframe them. We learn to, like I said, I've learned to understand I was a victim. I didn't do that. There was nothing wrong with being a child who wanted to be loved. There are lots of children out there. The problem is that there are people out there who misinterpret that and then use that as a reason to do bad things, right? So, how... And by the way, you left LAPD to go and do this work. I always call you like the real life detective Stabler, because not to be funny, but it's true. I see you a lot in that light. Obviously, have you ever watched that and felt like there's some synergy there, at least in like his, he was always that, like, he really cared about what he did. He really cared about the victims. I mean, did you feel like that?
I did in a sense that some of those stories, although, it's the headlines, they're real. They're based on real stories. So yeah, there is a connection there, and I hear that a lot. So yeah, especially when dealing with the bad guys. Sometimes I made it a point that I would tell my partner, "Hey, I'm not leaving this room until he confesses." So take notes. We're in here for the long haul, and I could tell you that as a tag team, my longest interrogation with other detectives was 14 hours long. Mm-hmm. Some go 2-3 hours before we get them to start talking about what happened. So yeah, it's because we gotta fight for our victims. Because if we don't get a confession, sometimes we can't get justice. Because by the time we learned about it, we lose the ability of any forensic evidence, such as DNA evidence, any biological evidence, any eyewitness accounts, any whatever it may be, a crime scene. We don't have the ability to investigate a crime scene or process a crime scene. So we lose all that. So that's why the only opportunity we get is we got to do our job, use our skills, use our skill set and our expertise, and get people to talk. And, I want the truth wherever the truth leads me. And if the truth says this person did not commit the crime, I'll go there as well. But oftentimes, the case was just the opposite, and we get justice.
It's amazing. I remember when my oldest daughter, when we lived in Huntington Beach, and she'd come home and her classmate was being molested by her stepfather. Yeah, I had contacted the police. I had filed a report. I remember they went to her house that first night. My daughter was in middle school at the time, so these girls were middle school age. And the first night was one of those situations where she just choked up. She just didn't know what was happening. And then the next day I remember going down to the school and talking to her and saying those words to her. "You're not at fault. I'd like to go with you to the principal's office. I'd like for you to tell your truth, not with your family around where, and I'm saying this to say that eventually she did tell the truth. It came out that the mother was also in on it. The mother was actually telling her daughter, come to find out the stepfather had been molesting her since she was 7 years old. He was grooming her to rape her. And sadly, the mother was dependent on that husband. So she told her daughter, if anyone ever finds out, this is going to be bad for us. And so the daughter complied. Well, what's interesting is when everything happened, the mother went to prison, the stepdad went to prison, and everything about this young girl's life changed. I felt bad a little bit for a moment, but then at the same token, I couldn't be. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is you can't feel bad in saving somebody from a life of abuse. As much as I was sad that her, I remember her biological dad had to come in the picture. She had to move to Texas and there were all of these things. But ultimately, I have to believe that I gave that girl a shot at a better life. I couldn't go to sleep at night knowing that she was in that household surrounded by these type of situations. So for you, I mean, because like you just said, what made that, it came to mind when you said you saw the girl, you did the case, and then these times. So, have you also had to deal with the fact that you are changing sometimes people's lives quite dramatically, but believing in the good that you're creating over the negative?
Absolutely. I actually keep in contact with some of the families that I've helped, and I still keep in contact with them through social media or phone calls or holiday greetings, and just to see them where they're at now in their life, where they're thriving and they're doing really, really well, it just brings a lot of joy and gratification to me. But more importantly, I remember telling them, look, right now you're going through hell and it's horrible and I'm sorry. I wish I had a magic wand that I could make everything good and better. But I could tell you one thing for sure. I'll make this promise, is that when you become a mom and a wife, or however it is you're going to do your life, you're going to be the best mom ever. And when I see them now, and I see their children, I see how they're raising their children, and I see how they're involved in, Girl Scouts and their school activities and sports, and how they're having multiple children and growing their families, man, that is just an awesome feeling. And so, yeah, it just, you can't put a price on that. And so it helps me explain to my family, this is why we do what we do. This is why, I missed those holidays, or I got called out in the middle of the night, or I had to leave family dinners because I got this call out and I had to go. So I do have one particular family that I have not seen. There's two young girls, Grecia and Daniela, that I hope somewhere they'll see me on social media or something, reach out, because that was one case that I still wish I would have kept in contact with. But what they went through was hell at a very young age. And even when they got placed in foster care, they continued to get victimized. It's like, wow, these kids can't get a break. So you're right. You did give this particular neighbor a shot in life that otherwise she would have got continued sex abuse. And who knows, maybe she would have taken her life, or maybe she would have, done something crazy. But now she has a shot of life. So, I'm sure that if you ever find out, you're going to be happy to see that maybe she's doing really well. And a lot of times they come back and pay back. They get involved with organizations like Peace for Violence or the East Los Angeles Women's Center, and become an advocate and give back. And I've seen that a lot. And so it's amazing how, just this cycle of, when I heard the term hurt people, I don't agree with that, because I've met a lot of great people that have been hurt and they don't come back as offenders. Does it happen? Yes. I'm not going to be naive and say it doesn't happen, but I just don't agree with that. That's a cop-out that we want to give everybody. Well, he did it because he was hurt, whatever.
Right.
Well, I grew up in a single-parent household in East Los Angeles where I saw domestic violence and I saw things happen in the home. And I actually remember deciding, I have to decide, do I join this gang that's next door or do I not?
Right.
And so, so anyways.
Well, I love a modern version of that saying. And when you said it, I smiled, because something I've come to learn to say is, okay, there's hurt people that hurt people. We know that, right? But healed people help heal people.
Oh, I love that.
And that's what I do. And that's how we serve our communities, I feel. And, it just really quick, I know we have, as we move in, with the AB218 law. So again, we know it ends at the end of this year. There's a process. People still have time to file. But if they do, they want to kind of get on going now. Right. There have been several cases, though, that have been, mine is still going through the process and looking good because of all the work that you've done. Right. And kudos to going and standing out people's, you really standing out there and doing his thing. We drove to Santa Maria. Okay. But what what have you seen? I mean, people being, and it's not even about the money. I mean, so that's one thing that I have to point out. When you first came to me too, also because of the civil, I'm like, oh, well, people are going to think it's just about the money. It's not about them. I've never even asked, remember originally what I just said, okay, fine. Because if I can show other people what it means to go through this, that's fine. I'm okay with that. But when I think about what I could do with that, right. And how I can help others, especially with what I do now. So I don't feel so much guilt, but what have you seen so far in some of the cases that have been resolved for the AB218?
Well, right now we have probably over 100 cases that we're actively investigating. The majority of them are going to be filed. And so right now it's a learning curve too, even for the courts, because there is a certification, like in your case, any victim that's age 40 or older, we have to have what we call a certification process, which means we need that person to be assessed by a psychologist, family marriage therapist, to be interviewed, and then that person makes an assessment and then has the opinion as to whether or not they believe this person is a victim of childhood sex abuse. And if they do, they'll sign this affidavit. We'll present that to the court as well. But if they're not age 40, we don't need that process. We could just file the case regardless. And then we need permission from the court to actually go public. So in your case, I think we're at that stage.
Yes,
where
that's how we were able to get in the news and be open about it.
And so, but just know in general terms, a victim of even like adult sex crimes, you have 10 years to file a civil lawsuit. And then there's something called a delayed discovery, which means, like, let's say you go beyond the 10 years and it's too late now to file this civil lawsuit. But you as a victim, if you can show that you did not appreciate the harm that was caused to you until, let's say, at this particular time and it's past the statute, the clock starts running from that day that you appreciate. How did you appreciate? Because then you went to go seek a counselor, a therapist, and that's when it first came out, and you began to appreciate the harm that was caused you because of this. Then from that day that you first discovered this, we call delayed discovery, you have 3 years from that day. So, as children, the statute of limitations is different, but you could always call our office and we'll guide you through that. If you have something that you want us to triage and assess, feel free to reach out.
It can't be easy what you've done and what you do. Tell me the things that you're most proud of in the legacy that you're leaving behind. When not that you're going anywhere anytime soon, but the legacy that you build every day.
I think I'm most proud of making my boys proud of me. And I really didn't realize that until I had my retirement party, where I had my 3 boys. It was impromptu. It wasn't even something that we talked about it, but I finally gave an opportunity. Hey, do you want to say something? And all 3 of them, their own unique personality, their own style, they did an awesome job, talking about me. 2 of them actually roasted me, Jacob, and I posted that video on Instagram, and it's hilarious how he did it. But anyways, just to see them appreciate me on how we did it and appreciate the sacrifices and how they honored me that night, that's how like I said, you can't put a price on that.
Yeah. I mean, I understand that. It feels good when my kids understand all the things that we do. A lot of times it seems selfish to them when they're growing up, but and especially when you're making this impact for other people, it's easy for them to say, well, you're giving so much attention to them. What about us? But you've always been there. You were coaching. I know you've always given what you can. And I think that's a very admirable thing to see you balance it. And differently from Detective Stabler on the show, actually, in that sense, no similarities. Yes. You've managed to have a beautiful marriage for, decades and a strong and loving family unit. And given the fact that I know you've told me you've sat down and spoken to the devil many a times, and then you got to go home and shed that off. How do you shed the negative when you walk into your home?
Actually, one of the first things I do, I'll go into the restroom and say, I'm going to wash the city of Los Angeles off my hands. And sometimes I even take a shower, because coming from a crime scene and you just feel that right now you just reminded me about talking to the devil. It was the worst case ever. But yeah, it's just really, really tough. But faith, family, and friends. One of my outlets was coaching soccer, the youth program at AYSO, and now we're in club. But that's where I got to see children in a positive light. And soccer is such a great sport where you can have a lot of life lessons from what happens in that sport. And so that was my outlet. I also was a referee. But for me, it was my faith. Every Sunday morning at church, I would pray, say, God, clean me, cleanse my heart. It was during worship. And then I would pray for my victims. I would pray for the victims that I'm currently helping. I would pray for the victims that I helped in the past. And then more importantly, I pray for the victims that are coming in the future. And I think that's what kept me going for as long as, even today, I still keep meeting victims, even in my assignment now. So I think that's what helps me. And then when I share that story to a new victim that, you know what, I didn't know you, but I've been praying for you, when I kind of share what I do. And you could see something, just a connection that's very special. And now they feel that they could trust me, and then they open up, and that's how I do it.
Wow. Yeah, because a lot of times a victim, we're praying for somebody to come along and see us and hear us. And everything that you've said, I want to thank you, because we didn't tell you that the theme this season has been trusting the process. But everything that you've just said, you know, contributes to the conversation, being grateful, knowing that you can't control everything, but you can only control what you can control. You know, having faith in the unknown, and just visualizing, you know, and also even, I'm sure, embracing a bit of failure. Not every case has been solved, right? Not every time you got the bad guy, but that didn't stop you from moving forward. And so my last question is, in those moments, how do you trust the process?
Sometimes it's knowing how to navigate through that process. And so that's what I'm doing now. I'm advocating for victims. In fact, I'm working on a couple unsolved cases that I'm trying to advocate. And thankfully, through my advocacy under Marcy's law, the detectives, you know, give us the attention that we deserve or need. And I hope that there's a break in one particular case pretty soon. And so, yeah, so you just keep fighting and know that there is a greater reward, and that is, for me, God's reward. And so that's my ultimate hope, is that, you know, a leader is someone who rejects being passive and leads courageously, but lives for a greater reward. And that's what I tend to do.
Oh, I love that. That was so well said. And thank you for what you've done for me. You know, you've always been a good friend. I remember the very first moment I met you, handing off an application, you know, to you for my son to get on the AYSO team. And that was over 10 years ago. So,
and I actually remember the very first goal he scored. It was such a special moment. As soon as he scored, he looked for you.
Oh,
and I'll never forget that.
So, and I was there. So, okay, now we're going to just transition. We have rapid fire questions, a couple minutes left. These just give us a moment to get to know you a little bit better and have some fun before we head out of here. So really quick, where would you go if you were invisible?
Rome.
Okay. What is the first thing you notice about someone when you first meet them?
Probably their smile.
I was wondering, this is a detective. Like, is there anything like, you know? Okay. What's your favorite movie quote?
It's from Chicken Little, the movie. You have to just be there to watch it, but it's when Chicken Little's running the bases and he's going to score, and there's all the excitement whether he's going to score or not. And you know, the animals are talking. This is horses, hold your breath. No, hold your breath. I forget. Horses, hold your breath, or breath, hold your horses. And to me, it was funny, and it's that comic relief. That's how we get. You know, that's how we deal with our stresses. Is that we have to find some sort of sense of humor. And
yeah.
So that.
I thought you were going to say, "Do you feel lucky today?" from Dirty Harry, but no. Okay. If you were stranded on a tropical island with two things, what would you want with you?
A knife and a tarp.
Oh, there you go. Hey, smart. There you go. He's done the survival training, I can tell. Okay, last question. What advice did you get that was the most rewarding?
When I decided to become a police officer, there was a background officer that went to my work, and that time I was working for the Boys and Girls Club in Carlsbad. I was only 19 years old. I was going through the reserve process first. This lady that worked there, she was older. She saw the background investigator, and she dragged me into this office, and I thought that was weird because I was actually her boss, even though she was older. And she said, "Sit down." She goes, "I'm going to talk to you." And it's coming from a divorced wife of a deputy sheriff. And what I'm about to tell you, you better take heart. Avoid the 3 Bs, the booze, the broads, and the bills. And then she went on to explain each one. And I'm glad I got that talk because, like I said, I grew up with a mom, single parent. I never had a father. And I really, I grew up in church and I, heard about the 10 Commandments and everything. But that one really stuck.
That one stuck.
That
I
one
like
stuck.
it.
So
The booze, the broads, and the bills.
'Cause they all get you in trouble in law enforcement.
I will agree with that.
And not only that, in life.
For sure, for sure. Well, thank you so much for coming back and sharing this. And we'll be sure to come back and do another update at the very end. But in the meantime, continue doing all the great, wonderful things that you're doing, the incredible things that you're doing. And I appreciate you.
Well, thank you. Really appreciate it. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Oh, and really quick, where can people support you? Social media for our listening audience. Go ahead and tell them your social media handle.
So on Instagram, you can find me at Detective Moses Castillo. On Facebook, just regular Moses Castillo. Twitter is Detective Moses Castillo. And I know I have a TikTok, but I don't even use it, so I don't even know what it is, or Snapchat. But I'm sure it's there, but I hardly ever use it. But
IG,
thank you. Yeah.
No, perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. Just quick, don't forget, support, subscribe, share, and go to www.unsugarcoatedmedia.com/shop to check out our merchandise, support what we're doing. Until next time, thank you so much for letting us be unsugarcoated. Take care. Bye-bye.